Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family tree.
Hello listeners, it's time for the Genealogy radio show. And this week's show is about the land records in genealogy. We have an expert in studio today, Aiden Ferrick, no stranger to the world's international stage in genealogy and no stranger to genealogy research. So first of all, just a little bit about Aiden. It was while trying to distinguish between fact and fiction in his own family research that he decided to complete a 3-year certificate course in genealogy at University College Dublin. And he has set up a genealogy research company with John Hamrock and researched several different aspects of families, involving tracing families through the census and land records, business directories, relatives of families who emigrated to the USA, and so on. So in a life before genealogy, Aiden read classical languages and taught, and this activity was interspersed with spells of broadcasting. So, as well as being a member of AGI, Aiden is also a member of the Genealogy Research Society and the Association of Professional Genealogists, APG. So welcome, Aiden, to the show today.
Thank you very much, Lorna. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
And Aiden, let's talk about why are land records important in genealogy?
Well, they're important because most people lived on the land. And they say around 1850 or so, about 3 out of every 4 people actually lived on the land in one form or another. Some were landlords, some were tenants, and some were agricultural labourers. So they were captured in a survey of land which was done around that time. It's called Griffith's valuation, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Griffith's valuation took place before civil registration. So when we examine the land records, we often find ancestors at a time before they were recorded, sometimes not even recorded in the church records, which go back a little bit further. But it's a vital part of let's say, what we need in genealogy to paint a picture of a family in its context, because land records tell us a lot about the family.
Oh. And what land records then are available?
Well, Lorna, land records go back really, really far, but the ones that actually concern most people belong to the 19th century, and they're basically two. One, and the most important one, is called Griffith's valuation. It's not a valuation of land just for the sake of valuing land. Land was valued for its taxable, how much it could be taxed to support various services provided by the local authorities. Before that, in the 1830s, there was another land valuation. It was partial, and it's called the Tithe applotment books. It was a kind of tax payable to the Church of Ireland, but everybody had to pay the tax, not just Church of Ireland members. So that was a first attempt in the 19th century at valuation of land, where we can find the names of our ancestors and where they lived, and sometimes what kind of land they had.
And what kind of land can we see that they had in the...
Well, we can, because a typical page from Griffith's valuation, which is very easy to find nowadays, compared to, Lorna, when we started maybe about 15 years ago, where you had to go to a library and look at microfiche. Now it's actually online and free of charge, and it's called Ask About Ireland, that great website which has Griffith's valuation. So you find, first of all, the place where your ancestor lived. You find who his landlord was. You find a description of the farm. It will tell you whether the farm had land, or just land, farm buildings, and a house, if there was a house there, and where roughly the house was, because all these are accompanied by maps. Then it tells you the acreage, and finally, of course, the last columns go into the nitty-gritty, which is how much tax you have to pay. So you can find out what kind of land your ancestors had, how much it was, and where it was located. And, of course, the name of the... we call him landholder because at that time in the 1850s or so, most tenants did not own their own land. They rented land from the landlord, whose name is given also. And we can research him too.
And can we tell the quality of the land?
Yes, we can. Because when Richard Griffith set out to do a valuation of land, he wanted to put it on a scientific basis. So what he did was he examined the quality of the soil in an area, in a farm, let's say, in different fields. And on the basis of that, he established, has a description of the type of soil and what the soil is good for. So you can get an accurate, a pretty accurate picture of the type of land anywhere. Some of it, of course, is larger tracts of certain counties are just bog, and there's nothing more to be said really about that. But other kinds of land, the soil is described as sandy or clay soil, or with marl, or simply alluvial soil. So according to the type of soil, different crops grow well on it.
Well, that sounds very interesting indeed. So we can learn an awful lot from the land records then.
Indeed we can.
And is it done on a percentage basis?
Excuse me, what on a...
Like we'll say, you know, the tax. Was
Yes.
it percentage?
Yes, the tax, there's as all tax things, there's a complicated formula to calculate the tax due on the land. Now, it's called they're called the rates. And I think, I'm certainly old enough to remember the rates. The rates used to be struck at the county council meetings once a year, and it was so many shillings in the pound, and the pound referred to the valuation to be found in Griffith's valuation. Now,
Yes.
so it was a complicated percentage of that, of the productivity of the land. Land was assessed on its productivity.
But we'll say, was it standardised across the whole
Yes.
country?
Now, one of the great things Richard Griffith introduced, apart from the examination of soil, so the productivity was based on not a chemical analysis of the soil, but a very good analysis of the soil. It was based on other factors, like the acreage, the statute acre was the standard acre all over Ireland, according to Griffith. Before that, there had been many different types of acres. And it was standardized. So in other words, every page of Griffith's has exactly the same kind of information related to the particular farm.
Yes. So it's very... And the tithes, of course, are 1/10, isn't it?
The tithes are 1/10. Now, they also... the trouble with the tithes is they vary from diocese to diocese and from parish to parish. Some, for example, have just 2 qualities of land, good quality land and bad quality land. Others have 6 varieties of 6, let's say, quality standards of first quality, second, third, fourth, fifth and sixth. And that's kind of confusing because that is only true for some places. What Griffith did is he made one calculation for the whole, valid for the whole of the country. So it was fairer in many ways.
But the tithes may not have been as fair.
The tithes were probably not as fair because they were not fair because there were exemptions.
And who were the exemptions for?
The exemptions were largely in favour of the landlords, because the tithes commissioners, the people who assessed the land, were taken from basically the same community. They were taken from the Church of Ireland communities, and there was no representation of the majority of tenants. They were concerned mainly with the landlords. So
but the tenants are named, though, in the tithe allotments.
Sorry?
The tenants are named in the tithe allotments.
They certainly are. They certainly are. Those who pay tithes are certainly named, but they can be simply John Smith and partners.
Yes.
So the partners, you have no idea how many partners there are. So he's kind of the head tenant.
One of the things I notice on researching it is that the tithe allotments townland names change between that and Griffith's.
That's the other thing that Griffith introduced. He standardised and eliminated townlands. He had a kind of an ideal townland, so it would be around 200 or 300 acres. The smaller townlands got eliminated. In my own parish, where I did a study of the tithe allotment book for the parish, the 80 or so names in the townland names in the tithe allotment books became 60.
Yes, I would have seen that in studies I've done in East Clare as well, that the townlands disappear between.
They do.
And of course Griffiths, just to make people aware that it was done between 1848 and 1864.
Well, it was published then, Lorna, but actually Griffith began work in 1830.
That's right.
And it continued until 1865. It was a 35-year work. And he employed a large number of people, a large number of valuers, and according to himself, he traversed the whole of Ireland at least 40 times a year.
And he died at an immense age. He was in his 90s, I think.
He was indeed, and he was lucid to the end.
So
now, he was he had been a civil servant for 60 years.
So,
and the only civil servant that I know ever met who actually refused a pay rise.
Very few of them. Now, the Griffith's valuation, I notice sometimes on the side you see little marks of A, B, and maybe 2A, 2B.
Yes.
Can you talk us a little bit through those?
When you look at it closely, the capital letters means that's a quality lot. In other words, the soil in that area of the farm is different from B or C. It is a different quality. So
they're rating
they're
it.
part of the same farm, but the land is of different quality.
And what's the different number about? 1, 2, 3, 4?
That's simply the lot number. As they went along assessing all this, they had a map and they put numbers on the map. Now, the other thing to note is the small letters, the italic letters, and that tells you where the house was on the land.
That's an excellent tip altogether. So the small letter...
The small letter is the house.
Is the house.
Yeah. And there can be, of course, more than one house on the map, but A, the letter A is always the landholder's house.
Yes.
Wherever B and C may be agricultural labourers, for example.
Exactly.
You find that in some counties. It's very common in Tipperary, the rich counties, Meath, Kildare. That's where you find the farm labourers.
So that is absolutely fabulous, and fabulous tips about Griffith's valuation. And of course, you have the valuation, you have the revision books as well.
You have, of course, the revision books. But just before we leave Griffith's valuation and ask about Ireland, you can actually see everything on a map. It's right on the same page. So you just click the map and it'll come up for the place. Not only the map of It's a little bit after Griffith's time, but still, for most places, it's good enough. You can actually get the satellite image and the Google Maps as well on the same page.
Yes,
it's brilliant.
That is brilliant, and it's a very good way if you want to go and try and find your ancestors.
You have Google Maps there.
Yes, I've just done this on a map actually, which has been very useful to try and point out if there's still habitation in an area that would be worth looking at and so on. So,
sorry, to come back to your question, Lorna, you asked about the valuation office. Now, as you know, tax doesn't stop. It's always, your properties are always being revalued as time goes on and as circumstances change, and your circumstances may change as well. The valuation office contains the revision books. Griffith's valuation was brought forward in the Republic of Ireland until about the mid-1970s. In the north of Ireland, where Griffith's valuation still works, it's still the basis of local property tax.
Wow! So that's very interesting indeed. And
People will remember, Lorna, that it was struck down by the High Court in the 1970s. It was challenged as the basis of the rates, basically local property tax. And the challenge was upheld by the High Court, so it was back to square one. But we never did get back to square one.
Yes, yes. And what are the landed estate court records?
Oh, yes. That's another huge set of land records, which I'm glad you mentioned because they link in to Griffith's very, very well. The landed estate courts were set up in, let's say, after the famine, probably the early 1850s. They're the kind of NAM of the day. It was to deal with the whole question of states which were up to their necks in debt. And something had to be done. So the estates which were in debt were put up for sale, and a new title deeds were given to the purchaser. So a lot of land changed hands between 1850 or so and 1880, where land speculators, or land entrepreneurs, if you want to call them like that, came in and bought land and sometimes farmed it and sometimes sold it on.
Okay. And they were obviously getting it at auction. You see a lot of auction posters around this time.
Of course, they're sales brochures.
Yes.
Now, these sales brochures are very interesting because certainly they put the land in a very good light. There are big estates where they were unable to pay what they had been committed to, and these contain the names of tenants. You see, this is the great thing about them.
Yes.
The names of tenants are listed, and their tenure is listed. In other words, what kind of a lease did they have on the land? Many people had a lease just from year to year, which was the most normal one of all. Tenants were not kicked off the land just that easily. But many tenants, the older tenants, had leases of lives which went back not only in the 1800s, but sometimes to the late 1700s.
Yes.
So you can see how long a family have been on the land.
That's very useful indeed. And of course...
can I mention another website here which actually links up both? And that's Find My Past.
Yes.
So you have Griffith's valuation on Find My Past, but since it's under a larger land records, it actually brings up on the left-hand side of the page any mention of the name in the landed estates courts as well. So you're killing two birds with the one stone.
That's very useful indeed.
Yeah.
Very useful.
It's really useful.
And I know you have a number of personal recollections of land annuities being paid.
Yes, I have indeed. I found out doing research that my great-grandfather was worked for the valuation office.
As a valuator?
As a valuator in the Swinford district in County Mayo.
So what would that have involved in County Mayo?
Well, he went around measuring land.
With a chain?
He was involved in the revaluing land between the 1870s and the 1890s. So he's for about 30 years or so. And from that he got a nickname, which I didn't understand when I was young. He was called Clark Gallagher because he could read and write. And his signatures and his observations are all in the valuation office.
That's wonderful. And what kind of observations have you come across?
Well, observations is, let's say, would be house not well kept, or land allowed to go bad. Some very simple observations are not taxable anymore.
Was this due to emigration, or
down, or things like that?
Was this due to emigration, or the
yes,
people houses being left
where
idle?
I'm from, emigration was very high.
Yes,
in the 1880s, in the 1880s. Remember, there was a famine.
That's correct.
Late 1870s, 1880s, and then the Congested Districts Board kicked in the 1890s.
That's
so
correct.
There was a lot of change in ownership of land, and so land was redistributed.
And that's an important snapshot of that time. So,
yes.
But you must have been delighted at finding the.
Well, I was delighted to find my great grandfather there, and because, as you know, the greatest social revolution in Ireland, in rural Ireland, took place during 1880 and 1910, when tenants were actually enabled to purchase their own land, and that was the biggest social change which happened in Ireland in the 19th and early 20th century.
And this can be the hardest thing to explain to people too, that they didn't own their own land.
No.
There would have been very few landowners in 19th century Ireland.
Very, very few.
Very few. I
Very
think
few.
there's
we can actually tell,
1,000.
because there's a book of land, those people who own 2 acres of land or more.
That's correct.
Published in 1876.
And that's available online, and you can go through the list.
Absolutely. It is available online. And it's great just to check to see if your family owned land before the Land Purchase Acts.
Yes. And what were they, the Wyndham Acts? Or?
Wyndham was one of the people. Gladstone, of course, began. And a much maligned person, Augustine Birrell, who was the last secretary, who was the Under-Secretary before, during the 1916, he actually pushed through a Land Act as well. I forget which one. But they enabled tenants to purchase their own land, and I remember very well, there was a British government put forward the money, they bought the land, and then they allowed the landholder, now landowner, they gave them 50 years to pay.
Oh, that was some length of time anyway.
It was. And I remember paying one of our last in our family, I was sent into the bank when I was young, and I'd never been in a bank before, and I had the money in my hand, and I really didn't know what to do with it, except hand it over. And I think my father must have written something what it was for. But that was one of the last land annuities that we paid.
Now, that was before online banking now.
Indeed, long before that. And it's when banks were solemn and serious places, and only people with money went.
Well, Aiden, thanks a million for today, and I just want to conclude with the fact that you are one of our stalwarts for the summer school, Ancestral Connections, down in UCC, running from the 26th of June to the 2nd of July. We're still open for bookings, and Aiden will be working with a musical event, I hope, again.
That is true, Lorna, yes. That's
with Ilan Keoghl, who are our wonderful band that we have for our traditional music.
It was a wonderful evening last year.
Exactly.
And I'm looking forward to it again.
And we're promised, we have a concession rate for all Ireland XO members as well. So just to alert our listeners to that gives concession rate. And Ireland XO is wonderful for looking at the parishes and looking at the different kind of information that you can get on discussion forums and so on. And also I'd like to mention Facebook groups, Mayo, Leitrim, Limerick, Clare, Cork. They're wonderful groups that you can gain an awful lot of information on, and that help very much when you're looking at specialised local interests.
And it's for the townland names is where you require local knowledge.
That's correct. That's correct. But people do tend to have a lot of knowledge now. They're well skilled.
Yes, and Mike Feerick's idea of using the parish and parish volunteers as a basis. That is the key to local knowledge. That's where to go.
Certainly. So, Aiden, thanks a million for
Thank you,
today.
Lorna. It was delightful.
Thank you very. And the show will be podcast afterwards. It'll be podcast early next week. And you can call us on 065 9083 or text us on 089 422 8491. We also have an email at rcb.ie, info@rcb.ie, a Facebook page, a Twitter handle at Radio CB. So, Aiden, thanks a million for today and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Lorna.
Now, listeners, to conclude, all the shows are podcasts, so you can gain access to all of our past shows on Radio Corkabashkin website, rcb.ie. Thanks for listening, and tell your friends and relatives about the Genealogy radio show, keeping you in the loop.
Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family tree.